Good afternoon. My name is Sujay Kumar. I run the revenue for NStarX. Who is NStarX? We are a service as a software company, and essentially we bring the power of platform and services together to expedite the journey of innovation, the journey of going AI first or AI native for our customers. And these are typically your ISVs or enterprises across various industries. Today, it's not about me. It's about learning from the practitioners, the people who have done this hundreds and thousands of times. When you talk about, rubber hits the road, these are the experts. And today, we are very fortunate to have Jason Conyard, somebody who I look up with a lot of respect. And he and I have known each other for a very long time. And Jason, welcome to this podcast and thank you for being with us. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, happy to, Sujay. It's great to be with you. Yes, we have known each other a long time. I was just trying to figure that out. It's great to be with you. I'm Jason Conyard. I am the former CIO of VMWare, but I've had a career spanning several different industries: cybersecurity, finance, cloud infrastructure, from an IT perspective and also from a product management perspective. So that's what I bring to the table, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. So, Jason, one of the areas where we focus a lot is AI. It's a big buzzword today, right? And then, there's a huge hype that AI will replace humans. It's doomsday and all these kind of noise we hear in the market. But I think one area which you are an expert and you have kind of experienced that is what you call as human-centered AI, right? And so I remember reading about one of your articles, and you have fantastic coverage across these topics, and one of them was collective responsibilities in shaping AI's future, right? And you mentioned about approaching an event horizon with AI. So for our listeners who are typically, let's say, the CXOs and different decision makers across different functional groups in enterprises, what does this moment mean for enterprises today?
Well, let me just step back one place and talk about the human piece just for a moment, and then lean into the enterprise component. I have worked in technology for more than 30 years, and I've worked with some incredibly smart, thoughtful, innovative people. And I've been fortunate enough to be part of some incredible teams over those years. And I can tell you categorically that the biggest challenges that any project or any organization has had have overwhelmingly been around people, around the humans, not the technology. Sure, technology breaks, but more often than not, the problems an organization are facing around technology are because of the gaps around people's awareness, people's knowledge, people's understanding of what the technology is capable of, what the technology is not capable of, and so on and so on. So if you recognize that people are really at the center of what we do, both the good and the bad and the challenges, you can then think about that from an enterprise perspective and say, okay, yes, there's a new capabilities around technology, around generative AI right now in particular. How are we going to leverage those? You have to also at the same time ask the question, what are the human implications of these? So when I talk about an event horizon, the reality is many companies have already crossed an event horizon as it relates to AI. They are already, or parts of their organizations are already leveraging generative AI to solve business problems. They're either doing that intentionally, and in most cases, they are doing it because they're being dragged towards it because the products and the platforms and the services they leverage have embedded elements of generative AI.
Right.
So that event horizon has been crossed, either intentionally or by association.
Mhm.
And then the question is, are you allowing gravity basically to pull you in, or are you figuring out how to leverage that change, how to optimize that change to better service your customers, to better service your employees, and ultimately deliver better outcomes? And I would suggest that in most cases, the answer is no.
Very interesting. So let's think of it in a very pragmatic sense, right? So you spoke about 4 C's, and you're talking about clarity, context, collaboration, and compassionate scaling. So can you walk us through how a typical enterprise should think about implementing this framework?
Yeah, it's more of a guide than anything, and it's to get people to have a realistic conversation internally and to hold themselves accountable for the decisions they're making around AI. In many cases, people, like I said, they're being pulled in. They're being pulled in to this technical space because of the partners they have, because of the expectations that there are maybe of their board or their executive leadership. So I think it's important for leaders, whether those leaders are technical leaders, CIOs, CTOs, CSOs, or maybe they are the head of marketing or the head of sales. They have a different leadership role, but they recognize the role technology plays in support of their function, right? So I came up with the 4 C's to help people think about the decisions they were making and to guide them. So clarity. It's important to have clarity in what you are doing. What are you trying to achieve with this technology? If you're trying to just tick a box and say you're using AI, well, that's fine. You can tell people that the platform that you use to run your business, whether that's on Microsoft or Google or whoever it happens to be, has some AI capability and you're using it. So there you go, job done, right? But if you're really, really trying to say, what can we do to support and enable our customers to drive revenue, to deliver better outcomes, you have to have clarity. What are you trying to achieve? What is the objective? And is the organization aligned around that? Does everybody have the same clarity of purpose? Okay. So then there's context. Context is important because if you're going to use AI, if you're going to use generative AI to support you and enable you, it has to be prepared with the correct context. If you don't have the right context, you won't get the best outcomes. My goodness, in just the last couple of years, there are so many examples of failed projects where people have been trying to say, hey, we're using AI, we're doing this, we're doing that, ticking a box essentially. And they have wasted a tremendous amount of human resource and a tremendous amount of money in that objective. So having context for the tools that you're using is very, very important. Collaboration. There are so many examples throughout my career where a piece of technology has been delivered, brought to market, brought to an organization, and the planning around that, the design of the tool, the processes around it did not include the right people. Legal were not involved. HR was not involved. In some cases, I've seen organizations roll out support tools where the support organization wasn't involved.
Interesting.
And then people are surprised with the outcome, and not in a good way. So collaboration is very important. Spend the time now to get people on the same page and get their input. They will have insightful input into what you're trying to do. So make sure you have that collaboration so people are part of that success and a part of that journey. And then finally, the thing about compassionate scaling has actually several dimensions to it. One is, if you align your organization, if you have the correct context, if you have clarity of purpose, if you have collaboration in your organization, then one of the ultimate things you will get is you will have compassionate, or the ability to compassionately scale, because you're bringing the organization along with you. But if you do not bring the organization along with you, you are then relying on everybody to help bail you out when things go wrong. So you want to be compassionate about bringing the organization with you because it is more efficient ultimately. Some people say, oh my goodness, we have the legal people in here. They're going to want us to do this. They're going to want us to do that. Well, I got news for you. You're going to have to do that at some point.
Yes.
And you can either do it now or you can do it later. And it's going to be a hell of a lot more painful to do it later, right?
Yes.
So spare the week, spare the 2 weeks now and do it now and bring people with you. Because the other thing is, well, this won't be your last project.
Correct.
This will be one of many projects. And if you build that core team of competency, that capability with you, then you'll be more successful. And the final piece that connects to that compassionate scaling is also the impact that it has on your organization, which has a lot to do with trust and other things as well. And that is this. I know a lot of leaders are getting tremendous pressure to fulfill an AI dividend. They're being told, we want to save money by leveraging AI. We want to mitigate the need for some of these resources by leveraging AI. We want to downsize in this area. We want to optimize in this other area. If you've got a PE organization involved, then quite often they're in there trying to squeeze you to make you more profitable. And, a little bit of that pressure is probably not a bad thing. But here's what I want to stress about compassionate scaling as well. If you are not thoughtful about what you are doing, you will ultimately let go of the wrong people or redirect the resources, and they'll be the wrong resources, and you will pay a price. You will pay a price in your customer loyalty. You will pay a price in your employee loyalty, and it will cost you an awful lot more than that 15, 20, 25, or 30% saving that you were initially setting out to achieve.
Very interesting. So when you look at enterprise today, because if you look at the hype cycle, right, we're kind of crossing that hype cycle now as we go along, because like you mentioned that if you don't think properly, and if you're just doing some AI use cases for the sake of it, you will never cross to the production phase because you've already had a failed start, right? So in your wisdom, when you look at what's happening with this whole AI and how the enterprises are looking at adopting it, what is that single most critical imperative for enterprises around human-centered AI? Because I think human-centered AI should be the central point around which you rally things. But then, what is that imperative, which in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think one of the topics that comes up, and I've certainly been challenged around in the past quite fairly, is that people will say, "Oh, that you're talking about humans, you're talking about people. That's very touchy feely." So we're a business. We're about making money. We're about paying dividends to our shareholders, etc. And I would counter those arguments and say this. If you're focused on making a decision quickly, make sure it's not the bad decision or the wrong decision, right?
Right.
And in many cases, there's a lot of pressure to achieve a business outcome without that clarity. Remember the first
Yes.
one of my 4 C's.
Yes.
So what you actually get instead is you get a lot of activity, you get a lot of friction, a lot of heat, you get a lot of noise, but you don't actually get the outcome that you ultimately need. It's frankly, it's performative, right? We're very busy, we're doing this. So who's your audience? Is your audience the board and exec staff?
Right.
And are you trying to have a quiet life? Is that what you're trying to do? So you're just running around like a chicken, right? Trying to, demonstrate you're busy.
Right.
Or are you really trying to educate people and show where you can have long-term benefit? And I think if you want to do that, you've got to listen to people. You've got to engage humans around it. So the human piece of this to me is really about taking the time to understand and make smart decisions. And if people want to go faster, align faster. Get that clarity, get
Right.
people on board faster. My goodness, I've had the fortune of working for some amazing leaders in my career. And one of the things that I would say is consistent on all of them is that when they have wanted to move quickly, they have got everybody in the organization on the same page and been very clear with people about what's expected of them, and then said go. And then asked, what can we do to help? And I think one of the biggest risks in an organization, especially when you don't have strong and aligned leadership, is you have everybody running in 10 different directions. So it's kind of a long answer, but really the point is being human is really about leveraging those resources wisely. It's about learning from those resources. It's about making sure those resources are focused on the most valuable things.
Right. So when you look at enterprises today, where do you see the, I would say, combination of pivot and focus? So what I mean is, are the organizations only focused on productivity right now? Do you see that they are trying to find means where, okay, I am custodian of very interesting data sets or data, and I need to figure out how to monetize it, but I'm not ready. What should I be doing? So when you look at some of these aspects, where do you see the enterprises today spending time? And do you think they're doing that right or wrong? It can just be an opinion, but what are your thoughts here?
I think the answer is they're all over the place. And increasingly, because technology's been democratized, increasingly the technology decisions are not happening or being driven by the CTO or the CIO. They're being driven by functional leaders. So you have the head of marketing or sales or support or finance or, just keep going. They're making decisions, or people in their organizations are making decisions. And that's possible because so much of this has been democratized through software as a service and cloud-based services. So the challenge you have in many cases there is that you're not getting true optimization because people are off doing their own thing.
Right.
You're also growing a significant threat and risk landscape because there isn't alignment on the technology. So people are putting customer data or intellectual property in places they shouldn't be because it's not adequately secured, or they're also creating future debt. They're creating debt that will cost you down the road, become compounding debt, because basically you've got something that sales is going to need down the road, but marketing hasn't thought about it and finance isn't involved and so on and so on. So the reality is people are in many, many different places. And I think that's why it's so important that from a leadership perspective, executive leadership team down, that people are on the same page. It's fine to recognize technology, or it's important to recognize technology is being democratized, but there has to be horizontal alignment, because if there isn't, everybody will fail. If the marketing team is successful, but sales can't be successful, you will fail.
That's true.
If the support team are amazing, but the product team, can't get the capabilities, or the product team aren't delivering the capabilities the customers need, it doesn't matter. So you've really got to have that leadership alignment.
Very interesting. So that leads to a question. And again, because you have seen that, you are one of those individuals who has experienced that rubber hits the road. Where do you see enterprises today get the whole notion of human-centered AI go wrong?
Yeah, I think that the conversations are focused overwhelmingly on the technology and not all of the supporting capabilities. So as an example, there'll be a lot of conversations around optimization of LLMs. There'll be a lot of conversation around scaling. There'll be a lot of conversations around API integration, and so on and so on. But are people having the same conversations around how the policies that support those things are going to evolve? Are people having the same conversations around how the human skills that they need to support those things are going to evolve? I mean, my goodness, every time I look at an article about the Valley, it's about how some person has just been hired at another major tech company for millions of dollars because they're basically pinching the same people between the same 5 or 6 companies, right?
That's true.
Right? So I think, the reality is most companies can't do that. Most companies don't have pockets like that. And arguably their money might be spent better in different ways.
Correct.
So what are you doing to scale the talent that you have? How are you bringing your organization through that change? How are you educating your executive team so they know what questions to ask? So they understand the context and they understand the capability. So I think it's, huge fixation right now on the technology and the potential, nowhere near enough attention on what the supporting capabilities are and the human dimension of that change.
Interesting. So what you're saying is the reskilling of individuals has not really happened the way it should have in terms of where the technology is moving at a rapid pace and the speed at which the enterprises with their, let's say, human capital picking up that speed, that velocity, there's a kind of a gap, and then that needs to be taken care of. Is that how I'm reading it correctly?
And the reskilling or the reskilling in the adaptation of the organization as a whole, not just the human component, but also all of the other policy and support components as well.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
Because, we hear about all the LLMs, reasonings, but nobody's talking about, I shouldn't say nobody, but very few talk about AI ethics, AI bias. How do you bring in the right kind of governance into the mix?
I think there's a lot of talk about it.
Right.
But talk is talk.
Talk is talk. You got to walk the talk. Interesting. So then that brings me to another question where you, coming from that CIO, CTO, you've been in that shoe and you are in that shoe. So the question is, what is your advice for any CTOs or CIOs or any of these engineering leaders on what they need to do when they need to scale beyond a POC? A POC is a POC. But again, rubber hits the road when you move to production at scale. What is your advice? What are the things they should be doing when you are basically looking at moving from POCs to production at scale?
Yeah. Well, we could spend about 3 hours talking about that. I think that I'm going to take one step back and say one of the key questions. Often moving from a POC to production, inherent in that is several gates have been passed around the viability of the solution. Right.
Yes.
But often those questions are being posed purely in technical and support terms.
Right.
And I think what needs to happen is there needs also to be some very tough questions around whether or not the pilots and the prototypes are actually addressing the fundamental business goal that you set out to achieve. So back to that clarity of purpose, clarity of outcome, right?
Yes.
I think you've got to have that, because the risk is, again, that somewhere along the lines, what's actually being developed, if the question is this thing using AI? Yes. Does this thing, connect to these things? Does it tick some security boxes? Does it? Yes. All these other things. But I think fundamentally, the question also needs to be, is it addressing the fundamental business need that we set out to? And are we clear about those outcomes? One of the things you might do in that scenario is not just have a technical conversation, but meet with the business stakeholders and have conversations like, is this meeting our intended objective? Yeah. Is that objective still valid? Because again, sometimes time passes and we the problem we thought we would solve is no longer the problem, right?
That's correct.
So is it solving that problem? Are there clear stakeholders and owners for the solution that we're delivering? Do we have transparency around how the tools are being used, what's happening to the data that's being used? And do we have clarity on who is impacted by what we're doing? And I don't just mean we implement this tool, we're going to reduce staff in one area or move staff around or something. I also mean, do the people that have to interact with the tool understand what it means?
Yeah.
Right? Are they going to understand it? Because you don't want somebody on the phone with a customer or communicating with a customer and saying, I've no idea, it's in the AI somewhere. I mean, how many times have you been in your life? How many times have you been on a call with someone? Maybe it's an airline or somebody, and someone's like, oh, the computers are down, or this, that, and the other. It's not going to be too long before people are, insert big company name here, right? Going to be saying, oh, their tool is down or it's not available, or,
yes.
Well, that's the answer I'm getting from the tool. I've no idea why I'm getting getting the answer.
Right.
So I think, that visibility, that transparency is important. But I really think before you move to production, especially around an evolving technology, and especially a technology that in so many ways is opaque, I think it's really important that business clarity exists and that there's clear alignment around ownership and stakeholders and stuff. So I think that's really important. Okay, so moving from moving from pilot to production. I think the other thing there as well that's very important is in many cases, people will be moving from what's probably an internally managed system or a capability that's, fit for purpose for piloting and experimentation. They'll often be transitioning to something much bigger with far more complexity.
Right.
And what I would say about that is your challenges and your risks are only going to amplify. So it is essential that businesses really understand what it's going to take to roll back, to have kill switches, to have thresholds assigned and defined.
Very important.
Having thresholds defined up front is critical. You don't want to wait until people are screaming because something's gone south, or your company name is now on some sort of ticker tape on CNN or something like that. You want to make sure that all of these things are well understood in advance, and you will know what you're going to do and how you're going to roll back a particular scenario. So I think having that clarity is very important. And then, of course, you have all of the mechanical stuff that needs to happen around that change.
Excellent point. Because we have been hearing about some of these horror stories. When I use word horror, it essentially means, it is harming the reputation of the brand. And it is because there were a lot of these areas you didn't button up to ensure that, when you're looking at scale in production, there are a lot of things at stake, and you need to make sure that you're covering every single ground to ensure.
One term that I think is going to be used more is trust debt.
Trust debt.
I think because...
Guys, note it. Trust debt.
Because when people are moving very quickly to tick a box or to meet a very specific financial target because they've been challenged by it, in some cases, budgets have been cut before there's clarity on how you're going to achieve it.
Right.
There isn't an honest conversation occurring around what's going to happen when attrition hits a number. And of course, it's never the people that you want to leave that leave. It's always the people that you need to stay that leave.
Yes.
Okay. What's going to happen when you have attrition with your customers, where your customers say, I don't trust you anymore?
Correct.
Fundamentally, I don't trust you anymore. You can't explain what you've done with my data. You cannot explain why my service has been impacted in this way, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a real risk around trust. There will be trust debt, and it will be compounded. And I think companies really have to be very clear about how they're going to manage that. In the same way, by the way, is the same way as we're thinking around security today. We need to be thinking around the opaqueness of generative AI.
So let's talk about, so we covered a lot of ground on what is happening today, what needs to happen, what's going wrong, where when you go into production, what is it you need to be worried about. But then let's talk about also the future, right? It's very difficult to predict it. But then you're seeing a pattern, right? Yeah. We are, like we discussed, we are kind of crossing that hype cycle. So where do you see things happening in the next 1 to 3 years? And what, again, advice would you give to the CIOs and the CTO community of yours when, from your experience of doing some of these things at scale? What is your thoughts around that?
I think a couple of years from now, the companies that will have been successful in crossing that event horizon will be those that that aren't making headlines because of the screw-ups.
That's true.
They're making headlines because of the products they have, because of the performance that their company made financially, because of the trust that they have with their customers. So, and in many cases, it's the companies that have worked very, very hard behind the scenes, that have worked collaboratively, that have had that clarity of purpose, that have been clear on the context in training and developing the technology and the solutions. They are the companies that will have, in many cases, will be quiet success.
Mhm.
because they have been deliberate and thoughtful about what they have done. In contrast, there will be some big names and some small names of companies that have either made some very, very, very expensive and embarrassing mistakes, or are no longer in business. So I think in the next couple of years we will see that play out.
Very interesting.
What I'm concerned about, I mean, there's the professional component. I'm concerned about what that's going to mean to my peers and my colleagues and friends, etc. But there's also that perspective as well as a consumer, which is, well, what is that going to mean for me?
Yeah.
So on the one hand, we're leaning into generative AI and saying, wow, here's all the potential, here's all the optimization, here's how we can reduce a lot of that human friction that is not high value necessarily. But also, what happens when people don't get the prescriptions they need? What happens when people don't get the procedure that they need because systems predicted incorrectly?
Yes.
And so on. So I think the next couple of years is going to be messy. But the companies that really excel are going to be those ones that are deliberate and thoughtful about what they do.
We are at the last leg of our conversation, Jason. Going through this journey of where we are today, what we have been doing, where we have, done right or wrong, or, let's talk about where the future is, right? This is the speed at which the technology is moving is unbelievable. I mean, every day you hear either a new disruptor coming to the market, or you're hearing about this whole cycle of, consuming power, and, data centers are booming, and, you just hear all these things. Let's cut the noise. Let's just focus on this whole human-centered AI. Where do you see, what would be your advice for your fellow, CTOs and CIOs in terms of where they should focus in the next 3 years, or maybe 2 years, or just 1 year? I mean, I'll leave it to you to decide. But where do you think they should focus to ensure that they're actually deriving value? And then also, human-centered AI, in just simple terms, is like 1 + 1 is, can you make it resonate to 11 instead of 2, right? What is your opinion on that? Or what is your thoughts on that?
Like any transformational change, start with something simple, and avoid being performative about it. So pick something that's real, maybe small, but real, and transform in one area and demonstrate capability and build competence. So that's one thing I would say. Another thing I would say is that you're not really building AI, you're shaping it. Right? Mm-hmm. It's here, it's happening, it's all around us. So your opportunity is to shape it, to shape the outcome. And it's been said quite a lot over the last couple of years around the role of the CTO and the CIO and CISO and such. And that is that you have to be business savvy, which includes asking tough business questions. So when a leader in a particular area kind of waves their hand and says, we need something that does AI, or we need you to, AI and, or whatever, ask tough business questions. Ask the questions. What does that mean to you? Is this about velocity in the sales organization? Is this about customer engagement? Is this about reducing operating costs in support? Is it about get clarity on those points? Sharp, measurable clarity on those points. Okay, because you need to be able to defend the decisions you make and the recommendations you make. And you are, in many cases, as a technology leader, you are shaping and building their understanding of a capability as well. At the same time, they've got external forces coming to them, trying to sell them or give them promised capability. And of course, the motivation there is revenue for those companies. It's not necessarily solving an aligned problem. It's solving a vertical problem. Then as a technology leader, I would say this: build things assuming they are for the people you love. If you don't feel like the outcome of what you're delivering for is good enough for the people you love and the people you care about, well, there's your answer.
Excellent point. So one, parting thoughts. If you had to, as a CIO or a CTO, decide on build or buy or build and buy, what is your secret recipe in, let's say, short 60 seconds?
I think it's a false binary.
Okay.
I think unless you're a three or a 5 person company, I think it's a false binary. I think that you've got to retain competency and capability inside of an organization, especially any medium to large size company, to do some building yourself, but also recognize what your core competency is.
Yes.
The other interesting thing about this, and this is a deeper, longer conversation for another time, but so often the question that people ask themselves is how do we implement this technology? How do we get into this technology? How do we deliver this service?
Yes.
And they never have the second part of the question, which is how the heck do we get out of it? And I think that's back to a debt question as well, which is, I think, senior leaders need to also, they don't necessarily have to have a very detailed plan, but they have to have some competency, have to have some awareness of what it's going to take to roll things back. So I think that's an important part of the conversation too.
Excellent, Jason. This was so insightful. I think listeners, I'm sure you would have had great time listening into some of these very, I would say, pearl of wisdom from Jason here. So Jason, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And good luck with everything you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.